The history of Canada's colonization is a complex narrative involving Indigenous peoples, European explorers and settlers over several centuries. From the early days of European exploration to the establishment of French and British colonies, Canada's path to becoming a modern nation involved many different powers, influences and conflicts. Indigenous peoples before European contact. Long before European explorers arrived, Canada was home to a diverse range of Indigenous peoples, including the First Nations, Inuit and Métis. These groups had complex social, cultural and economic systems, with distinct languages and traditions. Indigenous communities had lived in the region for thousands of years, developing rich relationships with the land, animals and each other. Early European exploration, the French and the English. The first significant European exploration of Canada began with the Viking settlements in Newfoundland around the 11th century, though these were short-lived. The real period of exploration began in the 15th century with the arrival of John Cabot, an Italian navigator sailing under the English flag, in 1497, marking the beginning of English interest in the New World. However, it was the French who established the first lasting European settlements in Canada. In 1534, Jacques Cartier explored the Gulf of St. Lawrence and claimed the land for France. In 1608, French explorer Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City, marking the beginning of New France, a French colony in North America. New France, the French legacy. The French established colonies in Canada, particularly in Quebec and Acadia, modern-day Nova Scotia, where they built strong economic ties through the fur trade. The French focused on alliances with indigenous groups, especially the Huron-Wendat and Algonquin, who were integral to the fur trade. New France grew steadily with French settlers and missionaries establishing towns, farms and churches. The colony was an important part of France's broader colonial empire. However, New France struggled to defend itself from British encroachments, particularly in the Seven Years' War, 1756 to 1763, which saw Britain emerge as the dominant European power in Canada. British colonization and the shift of power. Following the defeat of the French in the Battle of Quebec, 1759, and the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, Canada became a British territory. This marked the end of French rule in the region and the beginning of British colonization. Under British control, Canada was divided into Quebec, later Lower Canada, the provinces of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Ontario, Upper Canada. British settlers and loyalists from the American colonies began to pour into Canada, especially after the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. Many loyalists who had sided with Britain during the Revolution moved north to Canada, bringing their traditions, languages and cultures. Independence movements and the creation of Canada. In the 19th century, as tensions rose in the British colonies in North America, efforts to unite the various provinces began. Following the War of 1812, when Canada successfully repelled an American invasion, discussions about Canadian Confederation gained traction. In 1867, the British North America Act united the provinces of Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia into a single country, Canada. This act granted Canada self-governing powers, though it remained a part of the British Empire until it achieved full legislative independence in the Statute of Westminster, 1931, and patriated its constitution in 1982. Impact on Indigenous peoples. The colonization of Canada had devastating consequences for Indigenous peoples. The arrival of European settlers brought diseases, land dispossession and cultural disruption. Indigenous communities were pushed off their traditional lands, and many were forced onto reserves or into treaties that led to the loss of their sovereignty. These colonial policies have had long-lasting effects on Indigenous communities, which continue to fight for rights, recognition and reconciliation. Legacy in modern Canada. Today, Canada is a multicultural and multilingual country, with two official languages, English and French. The legacy of French and British colonialism is visible in its legal system, culture and institutions. Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples, however, remains a complex issue, with ongoing efforts to address historical wrongs, such as the Indian Act, residential schools and land claims. The colonization of Canada shaped the country into the diverse and prosperous nation it is today, but it also left scars that still affect Indigenous communities and the national conscience. Understanding this history is vital to building a more inclusive future for all Canadians.